Have you ever looked up into the sky and wondered what else was there beyond what we could see? Past the outermost reaches of the Earth's atmosphere lies a region we call outer space. Outer space, or simply space, is a term used to refer to the wide expanse outside our planet.
I'm sure a lot of you know some of your own fun and interesting facts about space, but have you ever wondered what would happen if you actually went there? Have you ever thought about how different being in outer space would be from living on Earth?
Believe it or not, there are actually people who have lived and are currently living in space. The International Space Station, usually shortened to ISS, is a man-made habitable satellite that was launched over 20 years ago and can be found suspended in the Earth's orbit.
Since the year 2000, over 200 people from different countries have been sent to live at the ISS. Now, imagine for a moment that you would find yourself living there. What would it be like? Have you ever wondered what it would be like to find yourself in space like that? How differently would your body feel in space than on Earth? Well, the answers to these questions can be given by the people who live in space themselves.
They were asked what life there was like and how things were different. Do you know what was one of the most common answers? A lot of them described how the 5 basic human senses worked in space wasn't quite the same as how they worked back here on Earth. In fact, being in space unfortunately caused a few negative effects on their basic senses.
Some of these effects lasted for a long time and stayed even when they were sent back to solid ground on Earth. Now, to go into detail about these effects, let's talk about what would happen to each of your 5 senses if you were sent back to live in outer space.
Let's start with the sense of sight. According to a study conducted by the University of Miami, 2/3 of people sent to the ISS were reported to have impaired vision after being in space for a while. This is called Visual Impairment Intracranial Pressure Syndrome, or VIP syndrome for short. In space, gravity is weaker, and the air pressure there is not the same as on Earth. These changes cause some fluids in the body, which are normally found in the legs, to rise and gather near the area of the head.
These fluids can interfere with the operation of optic nerves and can also change the shape of the eyes, resulting in blurred vision. Sometimes the change is minor, but in other cases, the changes in sight are more severe and result in drastically blurrier vision. Luckily, researchers say these changes are reversible, although they tend to affect people for a long time, even when they are already back on Earth.
Now, what about the sense of hearing? Have you ever rode in a plane before? If you have, you may have noticed that your hearing was muffled. There might also have been some pain or pressure in your ears. Some of these effects may have even continued after you had already landed. This is because of the change in air pressure as you go higher, further away from the surface of the Earth. Our ears only work well when the pressure inside the ear and the pressure in our environment is equal. And when it's not, it can cause hearing loss.
This also happens when in space, where the pressure is not the same as on Earth. Temporary, and in some cases permanent hearing loss has been documented after long space flights. Furthermore, in a spacecraft or a space station, there's always equipment and machinery running in the background, which can also cause noise that can affect hearing. Fortunately, astronauts and people living in the ISS are given protective ear equipment such as earplugs and soundproof rooms to protect their hearing.
Next, we'll talk about how space affects the sense of smell and the sense of taste. Why these two at the same time? That's because smell and taste are connected. If you'll remember, in space, fluids in the body tend to gather near the head because of the very low gravity. The effect this causes on our sense of smell is similar to how you would feel if you had a cold. Your nose would feel blocked or congested, and you would not be able to smell things all that well.
Going on from this, the sense of taste is also affected by the sense of smell. If you can't smell anything all that well, you also can't taste anything all that well. Astronauts have described eating food in space as dull because they couldn't taste the flavors well, making the food seem unappetizing. Luckily for them, they usually regain their sense of smell and taste quickly when they go back to Earth, allowing them to eat and appreciate their favorite foods again.
Lastly, let's talk about the sense of touch. Unlike the other senses, the sense of touch in space has been described by astronauts and residents of ISS as more or less the same as the sense of touch on Earth. In other words, it's not really affected by space at all. What's interesting to note is that when they go back to Earth, their feet become very sensitive. Do you know why this is?
Because of the lack of gravity in space, astronauts live in a weightless environment, which means they move around while floating instead of walking. They don't really use their feet while in space, so when they go back to Earth, their feet, after not being used for a long time, become sensitive. It also takes people who have been in space some time to learn how to balance while walking again once they go back to Earth because of time spent floating around in the air while in space.
If you've ever wanted to go to outer space, or if you're curious on what being in space is like, these are some of the things that may happen to you while you're there. While some of these effects are indeed bad for humans, scientists have been working on creating better protective equipment to help lessen and/or prevent the negative effects of space on the body.
This will give more people the opportunity to safely travel or maybe even live in space without having to worry about the consequences. And who knows? If you stay curious, you might even find yourself being one of those people someday.
Thank you for listening,
and we hope you enjoyed this talk.